Hi, and welcome back to the Building Thinking Classrooms Now What Summit. I am excited about this strand because we're focusing on leadership and administration. And when we think about thinking classrooms, man, that's a piece that's often left out. And Tanika, I'm excited about what you're going to talk about and how can admins support their teachers who are trying out this thinking classrooms approach. So I'm not going to talk anymore, and I'm going to let you take it away.
Thank you, Marty. So thank you for this time that you are spending on this strand. As Marty talked about, we don't often talk about the leadership piece and the instructional leadership part of just implementing something new, such as thinking classrooms. And so as we talk about teachers and their risk-taking, we are also needing to remember as leaders that we are needing to help to support that risk-taking. As we develop that knowledge, we also give ourselves grace and just take a real approach. And we'll talk about what that means to instructional leadership when we talk about thinking classrooms. So come along with me and we'll dive right in.
Will it not advance your slide?
Nope.
All right, okay, try sharing it again. Welcome to having tech issues. It happens. We're rolling with it.
Or maybe I need to, nope, this still didn't work. Okay, so share again.
Yeah.
Stop share.
Yeah, stop share.
And then press
it again. There we go. This is just like in a classroom where tech issues happen on the regular.
It happens.
It happens. All right, now see what happens.
There we go.
Hey, beautiful. Go for it.
All right, so a real approach to instructional leadership in a thinking classroom. I am Tanika Canardo, and I am a professional learning specialist here with Keep Indiana Learning at CIESC. And I am super excited to be talking about leadership in thinking classrooms. So who are we? Instructional leaders, I mentioned that. Instructional leaders is what we refer to as a person in leadership dealing in the field of education. So that could be several different people, secondary department heads, could be assistant principals, instructional coaches, people who are empowering educators in an ever-changing educational space by illuminating their strengths and supporting their growth as they work to impact student learning. So as I said, that could be many different people in an educational space. So what's the dilemma? What is the dilemma that we are going to kind of talk about today? So some questions that I have wrestled with myself, as well as heard others talk about when they are in an instructional leadership position, is how can one be the instructional leader without having a deep knowledge in a specific area? Or must I be an expert in order to provide teachers with adequate support? Some feelings that I have heard, or some things that have been a roadblock, if you will, to some of these people being able to be instructional leaders, including myself, is the fear of being challenged by teachers or people they feel may know more than them. How can I be an instructional leader when some of my teachers know more than me? So the fear of being challenged. Or evaluator bias. How can I be an effective evaluator if I have bias? If I know that I favor a particular style of teaching more than I do this new instructional practice that's coming down the pipes? Imposter syndrome. How can I, of all people, tell teachers what to do in their classroom or give them advice on best practice or go into their classroom and act as if I know what should be happening when I may not know, or I may have very little knowledge, or just found out about this instructional practice not too long ago? Lack of passion. If I don't care as much, or if I don't know as much enough to care just yet, How can I support teachers? What if my enthusiasm comes across as fake? What if I can't even muster that enthusiasm up because I don't necessarily know about it yet? So these are things that will present a dilemma. It's hard to lead in the open space when behind closed doors you have these feelings. So let's talk more about a real approach to instructional leadership. When I talk about a real approach, I don't mean that other approaches are fake. I am using REAL in terms of an acronym, and those letters stand for research, engage, align, and leave it. So we'll talk about what those each mean, but when I say real, I do also mean getting real about it because it's a real thing. It exists. We feel it as leaders, and we need to just keep it real and talk about it because it'll help when we share those feelings with each other. It'll help us to tackle those. So the first one is research. Researching is demystifying the practices. The practices I speak of are any of the instructional practices that we may be unfamiliar with. When we demystify them, we make them more clear. I have a cloud around the Building Thinking Classrooms book because it's kind of clearing that fog when we demystify it. So we can do that by attending professional development anytime that we can get that. And so nowadays, especially with Keep Indiana Learning, but many others are also providing professional development that meets us where we are. So that could be virtual, it could be in person, and it can be in the form of a webinar. And that is including but not limited to. There are other ways that we can demystify those practices by engaging in professional development. Visit a school or a classroom. Who's doing it well? Who's doing it right? Go see them in action so that you can demystify it before you actually have to go into the classroom and support a teacher in those practices. Read related literature, and I'll combine it with online resources. So take that time to dive into that Building Thinking Classrooms book. See what's going on in there. If you open the pages and read it, it won't be as scary when you see it in real life. And then connect with other educators. Do this. Talk about it. Have a discussion about what you are feeling in terms of that imposter syndrome or feel the fear of being challenged. Talk with them and say, what's going on in your school building and how is it working for you? So research is the first letter of taking a real approach. The next one we will talk about is engaging. I like to think of it as breaking the barrier. When we go into a classroom as evaluators or even just instructional leaders who may not be in the evaluation role, but we are sitting in the classroom and there's like an invisible wall sometimes. I like to think of it as I'm the person who's going in, but it's like I'm watching it, almost like a fishbowl. I learned early on that it really helps me as an evaluator, as well as the students having someone visit or the teacher having someone watch them. If I break that barrier, almost like crack that glass, visit without devices. Go in and give the teacher notice and let them know, hey, I'll be coming in later, or I'll be coming in later this week or even next week, and I won't have a device. I'll be coming in so that I can just get a feel and engage with your learning and your students and see you in action and hopefully learn something new. Go in without devices will help to disarm that teacher, because with devices, you may look like you're doing an evaluation. But if you break that barrier and go in without devices and just go in as a fellow educator, then that will be helpful later on when you go in to really help with evaluations or even just support. Get your hands dirty. In the Building Thinking Classrooms book, Peter talks about thinking task. That's a great time to go in and get involved, because with the thinking task, you will be able to think with the students and go in and just have discussions and use your brains together. That's what I mean by getting your hands dirty, but I mean it figuratively. You may not be doing anything hands-on necessarily, but you will be thinking along along the students, and that makes that be more horizontal than that vertical. When vertical means like I'm going in and I'm above you all and I'm looking and watching what's going on in the classroom, it will feel more horizontal. I'm next to you and not necessarily above you in this learning. Talk with students in that thinking task or any other task that involves you all to work together. You will learn so much from students and how they like to learn and what they are learning, and even what the teacher is doing. You'll learn through student voice. Seek to understand, not necessarily taking this time to offer feedback. This is the time to just go in and understand what's going on in the learning environment. It also feels great for us not to always be in a place where we have to offer feedback to the teacher or even the students, but just going in to just observe and understand what's going on and what usually goes on in that classroom. But hold off on the feedback. Wait for the time to do that so that this time can feel more organic. So that is the E of R.E.A.L. And then we align. Consider these questions. How might these new practices elevate pre-existing instructional practices? These new practices, they are new because we haven't done them here before in our school building or in the classrooms, but there may be pre-existing instructional practices that these just help to come in and support. They may feel new because they have a new name, or they may have a spin on them, if you will. It might be a lift on something we've already done. But think about what you're already doing and just say, hey, this is just a little spin on what we've already been doing. And then it helps to demystify something that seems unfamiliar. And then which of our goals with these new practices help us to move toward? Think about our school goals or even our district goals. And we may think that they are separated. We may think that these new instructional practices that we're doing, these thinking classrooms, 14 practices, they have nothing to do with what's going on with our goals. We need to focus on our goals. Well, let's look at that. If we are focusing on, if you look at down at the bottom, if one of our goals is to support our students with social emotional learning, then hey, randomized grouping actually would support that goal, because we're talking about putting students in a position where they're not worried about being accepted. They're not worrying about what students they're going to be paired with. But as we randomize those groups, we're mixing up students based upon just a random choice or random pairing or grouping, and not necessarily them having that anxiety about who they're going to be grouped with. And that is a component of social emotional learning. And so seeing what goals we already have in place and noticing how these new practices will help us with those goals. How might these practices move us closer to fulfilling the district or state vision for our students? If this is kind of related to what we talked about with our school goals, thinking about they're not far-fetched. They're not so far off that we're spending time on something that is not valuable. They may already be supporting something that is required or encouraged by the district or the state. Leave it. Leave it at the door. Leave it is the L of R.E.A.L, the R.E.A.L approach. And not necessarily my favorite because I'm putting it above all, but it's the one that really requires courage. Leaving it at the door. When I say it, I'm referring to evaluator bias. Evaluator bias is something that happens when we have had prior experiences that will impact the scoring, or prior beliefs that impact the scoring that we assign to lessons that we see a teacher teaches, because we are thinking about what we previously know. But if you leave it at the door, then you are giving that teacher a clean slate, and we're not comparing to what we've seen in the past. Skepticism, when we don't know about something, when something has not been demystified, then we may have, and the next one says, empty judgments about something that we lack knowledge in. So leaving that at the door allows us to walk in the door with open minds and being able to be the type of instructional leader that supports teachers who want to take risk for our students, because effective and successful student learning does require risk taking. Our students are changing, and that means we need to change our practices. Leaving past failures at the door. This is personal, because if we've tried something and we thought, or we were the leader during something that has been tried in classrooms and it did not work and it wasn't successful, then we will dwell on that, and it will prevent us from supporting things that may work in the future. So leaving those past failures at the door is important. Exhaustion. Whew, let's just take a moment on that one, y'all. Exhaustion is hard to leave at the door. And I'm not telling you to not be real about what you're feeling as a leader, because it's a real thing. But we cannot allow exhaustion to make us be skeptics on what may be working for our students in the classroom. We have to learn to leave it at the door, because exhaustion will make us think that nothing is going to work because we are lacking the energy. So do the students, or so do the teachers, which is not true. We need to muster up that energy and that belief and make sure we're pouring into students in spite of our own exhaustion. And then comparison. Comparing what's going on in one school or classroom to another school or classroom or district is very dangerous, because what works for some may not work for all. So we have to make sure that we are taking on the thought process of thinking, what is working for this classroom, for this group of students, and what's going well for this teacher. Leave it at the door. Do not compare as you walk in. Make sure that you are walking in with an open mind. The end goal with keeping it real, or taking a real approach, it's not to be an expert, but to be willing to lean into new instructional practices. We are not set out to be experts. We need to create a space where we allow teachers to take risk and even fail, but making sure that we are there to support and illuminate strengths like we talked about before, and help them be supported in their areas of improvement. The end goal is not to predict outcomes, but to support teachers while they take risks, like I just said. It is not our job to say what will work or won't work. While we are trying it, we need to make sure we are supportive, but we are not predicting the outcomes. The end goal is not to solely decide the best way to deliver instruction, because we don't know, but to take a collaborative approach to preparing our students for the future. We're preparing our students for a future that are future jobs and opportunities that don't even exist yet. I'm sure you've heard that before. So we don't even know the best way just yet to deliver instruction. Sometimes we find that out through the process. And books such as, and practices such as the 14 practices and in the Thinking Classrooms model, it helps us to prepare our students, because those are things we may not have done in our experience as students or even teachers. But the best way to approach that is to make sure we have an open mind, because the students of today, that may be the very thing that works for them. So as instructional leaders, it takes courage, and we are brave enough to take a real approach in this Thinking Classrooms model, but any model that you may also be adapting in your school building or your district. Make sure that you keep it real with each other, because we need each other in order to make this work. Thank you. I hope that the Now What Summit has been helpful for you, and thank you for tuning in.